Thanks for joining us tonight on The Racing Report. My name is Rob Peeters, and I am your host once again for another fabulous little half hour where we are going to talk all things motorsports. The Brickyard 400 was in action this past weekend, bringing the cars and stars of the NASCAR Cup Series to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But of course, that wasn't the only race that was in store for us this past weekend. And of course, the race was a bit of a mixed bag. There was some good, some bad, but of course Corey Heim was the one getting it done, scoring his second Cup Series victory this year in a part-time campaign. How about that? Can't say enough about that. That's nothing short of amazing. Meanwhile, in IndyCar, we have seen the new images, the new renderings of the IR28, which is the new chassis that the series will run beginning in 2028. We'll talk about that coming up later on in the show. But of course, as always, we're going to start off in the world of Formula One because, boy, let me tell you something, we've got a lot happening. So, first and foremost, we'll start off with the fact that the series has announced that the Bahrain Grand Prix will take place in Malaysia. Yes, you're not hearing me incorrectly. The Bahrain Grand Prix, it is still going to be called the Gulf Air Bahrain Grand Prix, but it is going to take place in Malaysia. They're going to race the Bahrain Grand Prix at the Sepang International Circuit on October 4th. Now, this race is going to be right smack dab in the middle between the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and then the Singapore Grand Prix. So that is the big news. We've got at least a replacement now for the season opening Bahrain Grand Prix, which we were supposed to go to, not maybe season opening, but one of the season opening races, which we were supposed to go to all the way back in March and April. Now that race has finally been replaced, and so it's going to be called the Bahrain Grand Prix in Malaysia. So just remember, when we talk about going to Bahrain or going to the Bahrain Grand Prix, we're actually talking about going to the Sepang International Circuit in Malaysia coming up later on this fall on October 4th. Now, in addition to that, Formula One is planning to have a decision made on what they're going to do with the season-ending rounds in Qatar and in Abu Dhabi by mid-September. Now, Formula One says any replacement race that they decide, if, let's say hypothetically, the Qatar Grand Prix and the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix cannot move forward due to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, what they will do is they will move these races somewhere else in Europe. That's where they're going to finish, because they've apparently tried and thought about potentially holding a second race in Las Vegas to maybe fix some of that, but ultimately they've decided they're not going to do that. Number one, they don't want to kind of tarnish the race itself by putting on another one not long after that one. And then they also don't really want to compete with the NFL. That's the other thing that Formula One is talking about. They're really trying to avoid that NFL clash when they're racing here in the United States, if at all possible. So that's what we're really seeing right now. Now, F1 CEO Stefano Domenicali has said that some of the potential replacement sites could be Imola or the Nürburgring. So we could see Formula One go back to that Imola circuit, which it hasn't been on this calendar this year. It was last year, but not this year, and likely won't be for the future. But could see it maybe this year. And then also the potential of the Nürburgring, which, again, we're talking about these races in Europe around late November, early December. This would be very, very risky and tricky to potentially get right. No doubt the weather is going to be cold, unlike what it would be in Qatar or Abu Dhabi. But either way, this is the current contingency plan that Formula One has in place in the event that the Qatar and Abu Dhabi Grand Prix cannot go forward. In other Formula One news, let's talk about something. If you watched the Hungarian Grand Prix this past weekend, you saw Aston Martin was not necessarily at the bottom of the grid in all sessions. Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso have both given positive reviews to the upgrades that the team brought to the Hungaroring, with Adrian Newey even going as far as to say that the team now expects new parts to come for the Dutch Grand Prix, which will be after the summer break, and then also the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. So we could see Aston Martin getting more upgrades that could get them closer and closer into the midfield, which is definitely a massive upgrade from where they started the season, where neither driver could go more than 10 laps without risking permanent nerve damage. So as disappointing and as difficult as it's been to the Aston Martin team, and probably for Aston Martin fans as well, you have to look at it this way on the bright side. At least they're closing the gap. At least they have actual fixes that have closed the gap and are starting to close the gap. Will it be enough to get them possibly consistently into the points? Maybe not, but if they can just get out of that bottom 5, I think that's what they're going to be looking for at the very least. So, now, final piece of Formula One news to talk about before we move on into the next segment. And Motorsport.com is reporting that Cadillac is, quote, closely monitoring F2 driver Rafael Camara for a potential seat next year. Now, this appears to contradict what Cadillac has said regarding their long-term commitments to both Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas, in addition to Colton Herta. Now, if you look at Camara and Herta right now, Camara is by far the better driver comparatively, at least in F2 this year. Maybe it's more of a subjective statement, but when you're looking strictly at the results head-to-head, Camara comes out ahead of Colton Herta. And here's the thing. So Camara is third in the F2 championship right now, while Herta is 16th. So Herta still needs 6 super license points in order to get a super license to be able to run F1. And so what the problem that we're running into right now is if Herta can't get into that top 10, which would get him the required super license points, he would have to run free practice sessions, which would get him 1 super license point for each free practice session he ran, but he can only run 4. And so he needs 6. He could only run 4. He'd still not have enough super license points by the time 2027 rolls around. So this will be something we'll have to monitor going forward about what Cadillac does when it comes to their young driver program and their current driver program in regards to 2027 and beyond. But on that note, that is it for the world of Formula One. Let's go ahead now and transition into the world of IndyCar because, like I said at the top of the show, IndyCar has finally revealed renderings of its new for 2028 car, the Dallara IR28. Longtime motorsports reporter John Oriovitz, who is the author of Indy Split, great book, highly recommend checking it out if you haven't, posted a short video clip on the internet that appeared to show the IR28 on track along the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course. And here's some of the facts and details that this new car is going to have. Now, the IR28 is going to have a 2.4-liter V6 turbocharged engine, up from the current 2.2-liter formula. And additionally, the hybrid package is expected to be about 20 pounds lighter than the current system. Now, the car itself is about 100 pounds lighter than the current DW12 chassis. Now, here's a big change that's coming for 2028. The dampers in the current IR28 will also become spec, taking away one of the few components that teams have been able to design themselves. Beginning in 2028, the dampers will be supplied by Axis, which is a division of Penske Racing Shocks. So spec dampers, that's going to be something we're going to keep in mind here. While the car itself is said to be designed to break track records, with the series specifically hoping to break the Indianapolis 500 qualifying record, which was set by R.A. Leyendyk all the way back in 1990. So, hopefully by now we've run some nice little images of what this car is going to look like across your screen. You kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like. Now, we don't exactly know when this car is going to be on track testing again, and the only reason we knew about it was because of John Oriovitz. So, we don't really know when we're going to get an actual look of this car on the track, but it is important to note, look at the rear wing, look at both the road course chassis and the oval chassis. You'll see the rear wing kind of looks like very Formula One-esque. Of course, the front wings as well, very Formula One-esque. Be very interested to see how this car races and what it actually looks like and sounds like when it finally hits the track for the public to see. So that's what the IndyCar chassis for 2028 is going to look like. Now let's talk about current IndyCar news. And according to CNN, the IndyCar Series is putting up $35 million of its own money to put on the upcoming Freedom 250 Grand Prix in Washington, D.C. This is an insane number that the series that essentially says the series is footing most of the bill for this. I am very curious to see how this goes over when it comes to other tracks. It feels kind of like you have this money for this event, but you haven't spend anywhere near. You don't even need to spend all that money for some other events to maybe increase the promotion, maybe make the event a little bit better. That's an interesting number to say the least. But we'll move on from that before we get into opinion territory. I'm trying not to be opinionated on this show. But the next piece of news, and this is the final piece of IndyCar news before we move on into Formula E real quick, and that's Racer is reporting that Penske Entertainment and Fox have come up with a, quote, ambitious plan to hold an international race in the near future. Now, the track that has been suggested is the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya. Now, that will not be on the F1 calendar next year because, remember, it's going to be rotating with Spa. Spa will be on the calendar next year. Barcelona will not, but by 2028, Barcelona will be back on the calendar while Spa will not be. Now, Mark Miles told Racer that he does not expect any international races to be non-championship events, instead saying he expects, quote, 1 to 2 international races being a part of the championship. Now, the 2027 IndyCar schedule, like we talked about last week, is expected again to contain about 17 races, with a handful of those awaiting confirmation before the final schedule is released. So, that's what we have about international, your yearly international race press conference from IndyCar. Happens every year. It's been happening every year, and I wonder if we'll have the same conversation next year. We'll find out. Now let's move on into the Formula E news because this is pretty interesting. Andretti Global has announced that it will use Nissan powertrains beginning next season in Formula E. Currently, the team utilizes Porsche power engines, but of course that relationship has been kind of rocky since it began. Now, Andretti also says it's not going to make any changes to its driver lineup in Formula E and retaining both Jake Dennis and Felipe Drugovich. So, there's your Formula E news for the week. Let's go ahead and take our first break of the show, but when we come back, we've got a lot of Supercars news to talk about and plenty to get to in the world of NASCAR. So, more Racing Report coming up after this. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Racing Report. My name is Rob Peeters. Thanks again so much for sticking with us through that break. You know what? Let's talk Supercars. Let's get down under. Let's talk about some really cool Supercars news that just broke over the past couple of days. Now, if you're a longtime viewer of Supercars, formerly known as V8 Supercars, you might recognize this name. Garry Rogers Motorsport has bought Triple Eight Racing's wildcard entry for the upcoming Bathurst 1000 and will officially enter the number 34 Chevrolet Camaro with Nathan Hearn and James Moffitt. Now, that is a huge piece of news to discuss this week because I don't think many people had this on their bingo card, but to see Garry Rogers Motorsport return for the first time in what feels like about 6 years, at least for the first time in over 6 years, and a full in any capacity, really. And if you don't know, like I said, that team was active in Supercars from 1996 all the way up until 2019, but it has not made a start in the series since the 2020 Bathurst 1000. Now, unfortunately, Garry Rogers died last October, but the team was determined to make a comeback just in time for what would have been his 81st birthday. Now, the car will be numbered 34 and have sponsorship from Valvoline, which is really cool because not only is this car coming back for Garry Rogers Motorsport, but then also it's a throwback livery to the same car that won the 2000 Bathurst 1000. So that is a really cool development there in the world of Supercars. Looking very much forward to see a Valvoline number 34 car running around the Bathurst Mountain coming up later on this fall. Now, final piece of Supercars news we're going to talk about this week, and this is pretty big. Supercars says that its inaugural New Zealand doubleheader generated $21.4 million in local impact for both Taupo and Christchurch. Now, when I say $21.4 million, that's in Australian dollars. Converted to USD, that is about $14.8 million. So still a very big economic impact that Supercars was able to bring to both of these locations when it came and did a New Zealand doubleheader earlier this year. So that is great news for the series, great news for both of those communities, and glad to see motorsports making a difference, at the very least, to boost local businesses and the local economy. So, on that note, that's the end of Supercars news for this week. Let's move into the world of NASCAR now, because lots to get to. First, let's go ahead and start off the bat with the fact that The Athletic is now reporting that NASCAR's Clash is expected to return to Daytona for 2027, with an official announcement expected, quote, within a few weeks. Now, remember, the race has not been run at the Daytona Oval since 2020. In 2021, the race was held on the road course, whereas from 2022 to 2024, it was held at the LA Coliseum, and for the last 2 seasons, it's been held at Bowman Gray Stadium. So, NASCAR is expected to bring the Clash back to Daytona. If you want my opinion on this, you better reserve the spots for pole sitters, and then you could probably have a qualifier before for everybody else who didn't get in to the Clash on their qualifying speed or getting a pole or something. I understand it's not a 1-to-1 like the old Bud Shootout qualifiers when they had the cars that were fastest in second round qualifying go out there and run for a chance to race in the actual Bud Shootout. And that hasn't been around since, I want to say, like 2000. But either way, I'm excited to see the Clash come back to Daytona. I'm a little bit disappointed to see NASCAR not running the Cup cars at Bowman Gray, but also at the same time, I think this is a welcome decision, at least in my opinion, to bring the Clash back to Daytona and hopefully give us a real strong feeling when it comes to getting into Speed Week coming up next February. So, or this upcoming February, I should say. So, that's the big news there. Then there's more, but wait, there's more. Chicago Business, which is a publication out in Chicago, reports that plans for NASCAR's return to the Chicago street race have reportedly stalled, with the main hang-up being the size of the state subsidy that NASCAR is seeking in order to offset some of the costs to put on the race. This is huge because this could potentially make the NASCAR schedule for 2027 a bit different than what we expected. A couple of weeks ago and even a month ago, it was kind of expected that the street race would come back for 2027 after a year off. But now, according to this new report, that could not happen at all, which would likely free up an event somewhere. Who knows what would go there? Where would NASCAR consider going to a different street course? I don't know. I don't know that they were planning on going back to Coronado. They could, but it's just a lot of unknowns right now that have kind of been thrown up into the air with the news of this news. Now, obviously, I think that kind of gives a good idea that Chicagoland will return to the schedule for next year, possibly. It did sell out. It looked like the racing was really good. The fans seem to prefer Chicagoland Speedway over the street course. But again, NASCAR wants these street courses to kind of bring the racing to the fans. And I'll be curious to see if this ends up working. But ultimately, it's just too early to know. I want to know, but I don't know. And I think we're all in the same boat when it comes to that. So we'll just have to keep watching the news and see what comes out of it. Whenever NASCAR releases their schedule, maybe the Chicago street race won't be on it. But what will be in its place? That's the one question we're going to have to ask, and right now we just don't have those answers. But one thing we do know that we can report on is that during a recent Hauler Talk podcast, Mike Ford said that NASCAR officials have begun discussions on how to reduce the number of laps run under caution, specifically between stage cautions. If you've been on the internet at all the last 2 weeks, this has been a major point of contention with a lot of drivers, fans, and others saying that NASCAR races are too long, and fans who say that NASCAR races aren't too long are saying the main problem is just how long the cautions take. So NASCAR is working now on potentially alleviating that. Now, one of the potential solutions would be to change the location of the choose cone. Maybe that helps speed things up. Either way, I do know that we can't be burning 5 to 6 laps under caution after every stage. That is something that has kind of bothered me and a lot of other people throughout the last several years since we've had stage yellows. Maybe we finally figure out a way to cut down that time between them, but ultimately, we'll just have to wait and see what NASCAR comes up with. More into the driver news, let's talk about this. This was a bombshell that happened over the course of the weekend. Jimmie Johnson announces that he will drive the number 48 car in the NASCAR Cup Series for the first time since 2020 when he makes his final Cup Series start at the 2027 Daytona 500. So Jimmie Johnson, next year, remember he said on a podcast earlier this year that he was going to run the number 13. This has been scrapped. Not going to happen. In fact, Jimmie Johnson is going to return to the number 48. It will be a Toyota, though. For everybody watching this who doesn't like Toyotas, be aware of that. It will be a number 48 Toyota. And then the Hendrick Motorsports has not yet announced what number Alex Bowman will drive when he makes his final Daytona 500 start. Because remember, we talked about last week, Bowman is signed a one-year contract extension and will retire from NASCAR at the end of 2027. So, pretty cool news there, but either way, it was given by the blessing of Hendrick Motorsports. They've allowed Jimmie Johnson to run the 48 for the Daytona 500 and the Daytona 500 only. It is assumed that Alex Bowman will run the 48 for the remaining 35 races in 2027. Finally, in the world of NASCAR, Chandler Smith has announced that he will not return to Front Row Motorsports in the Truck Series for 2027. Current rumors say and indicate that he could be moving to Richard Childress Racing to take over the number 2 car in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, which remember is being vacated by Jesse Love as he moves up to the Cup Series to take over the number 21 Wood Brothers car. So, Chandler Smith not coming back to Front Row Motorsports in the Truck Series. FRM has not yet announced its 2027 lineup. That will be coming at a later date. That is it also for the news of the week. We're going to go ahead and take our second and final break. And when we come back, we're going to recap everything that you might have missed from this past weekend of racing, including the Brickyard 400. And we're going to take a look at the slim racing schedule that's on tap for this weekend. So, more Racing Report coming up after this. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Racing Report. My name is Rob Peeters. Thanks again so much for sticking with us through that break. Let's go ahead and break down the weekend of racing that we saw. First and foremost, NASCAR came into Indianapolis, kicked things off with a sellout crowd at Lucas Oil Indianapolis Raceway Park. Could not have asked for a better event that Friday. Caden Honeycutt scored the victory in the ARCA race and then came up a little bit short in the Truck Series race, but that was mainly because Lane Riggs led 198 of 200 laps to score his 5th Truck Series victory. He is long gone when it comes to the chase, which, by the way, ends in just 2 races for the Truck Series, so we'll definitely be getting, it's going to get tight there when we go to Richmond here in a couple of weeks for the Truck Series. But Lane Riggs absolutely putting on a clinic at IRP, and it wasn't like people couldn't pass. There was plenty of passing at IRP, it's just nobody could pass Lane Riggs, and that's sometimes just how it goes. But meanwhile, then the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series came to IMS on Saturday with the Pennzoil 250, and Carson Kvapil scored his first career victory in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, and it was a big celebration for him. Accidentally ran over, or did a burnout over the bricks. That's a big no-no, and it definitely caught a lot of people on social media the wrong way. They were not happy. People were giving Carson an earful, or a text full, I guess. But in the end, Dale Jr. apologized, said that Carson unhooked the radio before the message went out to him, supposedly to not do a burnout over the bricks. Still happened. Either way, it was a big deal. It was his first victory. Dale Jr. was nearly in tears out of it, and it was a good, solid race. He held off Justin Allgaier, who has by far been the best driver of the series this year. He has locked himself so far. In fact, Carson Kvapil, I believe, if I recall, is almost like 200 points behind Allgaier in second in the points. That's insane to think just how far of a lead Allgaier has. And we're coming up to the end of the chase, and he's still going to have a sizable lead because he's going to have all those stage points to fall back on, plus the seeding. So definitely an interesting way of going about it here coming up in the O'Reilly Series. But in the Cup Series, the Brickyard 400. Lots to talk about in this. Very difficult to pass on Sunday. There's no easy way to say it. It was a tough place to pass, and everybody kind of saw it. The race was won and lost on pit road. Corey Heim not taking anything away from him whatsoever, but he did get very lucky being able to pit earlier than everybody else and kind of take advantage of an early of a mid-cycle pit caution flag, and really kind of kept the lead from that point on. Now, what was frustrating was I think everybody watched as Joey Logano was the fastest car on the racetrack, but once he got up to the rear bumper of Christopher Bell, he just couldn't go anywhere. And in fact, Christopher Bell had a run on Corey Heim going into the outside on the with 2 laps to go. Once Corey Heim went up there to block, he took all of the air off of Bell's front nose. Bell washed up the racetrack, and that was all she wrote. It was Corey Heim's race to lose at that point. Now, again, this is not meant to take anything away from Corey Heim, but this does kind of draw home a thing that NASCAR needs to work on the dirty air with this car. The diffuser is causing a lot of issues, and I think something needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. That's all I'm going to say about it. Meanwhile, Formula One, McLaren brings that brand new rear wing, and Lando Norris goes out there and wins his first race of the season and gets the dub right before the summer break. So if anybody's going to be carrying some momentum into the rest of the season, it's going to be McLaren. And I think all of those papaya fans are going to be happy and glad to finally see their team back on the top step of the podium. Meanwhile, in Formula E, we had a thriller in Tokyo, at least in race 1. Dan Ticktum won after a last lap pass on Jake Dennis, and then after a race that went from dry to wet, Nick DeVries scored the victory in the second race in the Formula E race, and they've got one more race coming up here in a couple of weeks' time as well. But now let's take a look real quick because we're running out of time. We got to talk about some of the races that are coming up this weekend. Not very many. NASCAR's got a week off. Trucks, O'Reilly, Cup, all off this weekend. IndyCar's off for another week. Formula One's on its summer break. So what do we got? Supercars is in action. If you're a night owl like me, that's just a great thing. The Supercars Perth 440 is in action this weekend with race 1 set for Saturday at 12:40 a.m. Eastern Time. Race 2 later that morning at 4:20 a.m. Eastern Time. And then race 3 is going to be Sunday at 3:20 a.m. So some late nights, overnights if you are a Supercars fan. Remember, you can still watch those races on demand by subscribing to SuperView on YouTube. That's only about $6.99 a month. Highly recommend it. If not, Racer Network is also broadcasting the races this weekend. You can check those out, maybe even DVR them as well. The ARCA East Series is in Flat Rock. That race is going to be Saturday at 7 o'clock Eastern Time on Flow Racing. Cars Tour West is at Colorado National Raceway. That's going to be Saturday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, also on Flow Racing. USAC Sprint Week wraps up this week. Bloomington Speedway Friday at 6:15, followed by Tri-State Speedway Saturday at 6:45. Both those races will be on Flow Racing. And then finally, the World of Outlaws Sprint Cars is in Williams Grove this weekend, both Friday and Saturday at 7 o'clock Eastern Time on Dirt Vision. So that is it for this week's episode of The Racing Report. As always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And be sure to tune in again next week where we cover all of the news and notes of the world of racing. We'll do this every single week. So for WTHR, my name is Rob Peeters, and this has been another episode of The Racing Report.